Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man! Order. Statement. The Prime Minister.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a statement on the response of the Russian government to the incident in Salisbury. First, on behalf of the whole House, let me pay tribute once again to the bravery and professionalism of all the emergency services, doctors, nurses and investigation teams who have led the response to this appalling incident. And also to the fortitude of the people of Salisbury. And let me reassure them that, as Public Health England have made clear, the ongoing risk to public health is low, and the government will continue to do everything possible to support this historic city to recover fully. Mr. Speaker, on Monday I set out that Mr. Skripal and his daughter were poisoned with a Novichok, a military-grade nerve agent developed by Russia. Based on this capability, combined with their record of conducting state-sponsored assassinations, including against former intelligence officers whom they regard as legitimate targets, the UK government concluded that it was highly likely that Russia was responsible for this reckless and despicable act, and there were only two plausible explanations. Either this was a direct act by the Russian state against our country, or conceivably the Russian government could have lost control of a military-grade nerve agent and allowed it to get into the hands of others. Mr. Speaker, it was right to offer Russia the opportunity to provide an explanation, but their response has demonstrated complete disdain for the gravity of these events. They have provided no credible explanation that could suggest they lost control of their nerve agent. No explanation as to how this agent came to be used in the United Kingdom. No explanation as to why Russia has an undeclared chemical weapons programme in contravention of international law. Instead, they have treated the use of a military-grade nerve agent in Europe with sarcasm, contempt and defiance. So, Mr. Speaker, there is no alternative conclusion other than that the Russian state was culpable for the attempted murder of Mr. Skripal and his daughter, and for threatening the lives of other British citizens in Salisbury, including Detective Sergeant Nick Bailey. This represents an unlawful use of force by the Russian state against the United Kingdom. And as I set out on Monday, it has taken place against the backdrop of a well-established pattern of Russian state aggression across Europe and beyond. It must therefore be met with a full and robust response, beyond the actions we have already taken since the murder of Mr. Litvinenko, and to counter this pattern of Russian aggression elsewhere. As the discussion in this House on Monday made clear, it is essential that we now come together with our allies to defend our security, to stand up for our values, and to send a clear message to those who would seek to undermine them. This morning I chaired a further meeting of the National Security Council, where we agreed immediate actions to dismantle the Russian espionage network in the UK, urgent work to develop new powers to tackle all forms of hostile state activity, and to ensure that those seeking to carry out such activity cannot enter the UK, and additional steps to suspend all planned high-level contacts between the United Kingdom and the Russian Federation. Let me start with the immediate actions. Mr. Speaker, the House will recall that following the murder of Mr. Litvinenko, the UK expelled 4 diplomats. Under the Vienna Convention, the United Kingdom will now expel 23 Russian diplomats who have been identified as undeclared intelligence officers. They have just 1 week to leave. This will be the single biggest expulsion for over 30 years, and it reflects the fact that this is not the first time that the Russian state has acted against our country. Through these expulsions, we will fundamentally degrade Russian intelligence capability in the UK for years to come, and if they seek to rebuild it, we will prevent them from doing so. Second, we will urgently develop proposals for new legislative powers to harden our defences against all forms of hostile state activity. This will include the addition of a targeted power to detain those suspected of hostile state activity at the UK border. This power is currently only permitted in relation to those suspected of terrorism. And I have asked the Home Secretary to consider whether there is a need for new counter-espionage powers to clamp down on the full spectrum of hostile activities of foreign agents in our country. Mr. Speaker, as I set out on Monday, we will also table a government amendment to the Sanctions Bill to strengthen our powers to impose sanctions in response to the violation of human rights. In doing so, we will play our part in an international effort to punish those responsible for the sorts of abuses suffered by Sergei Magnitsky. And I hope, as with all the measures I am setting out today, that this will command cross-party support. Mr. Speaker, we will also make full use of existing powers to enhance our efforts to monitor and track the intentions of those travelling to the UK who could be engaged in activity that threatens the security of the UK and of our allies. So we will increase checks on private flights, customs and freight. We will freeze Russian state assets wherever we have the evidence that they may be used to threaten the life or property of UK nationals or residents. And led by the National Crime Agency, we will continue to bring all the capabilities of UK law enforcement to bear against serious criminals and corrupt elites. There is no place for these people or their money in our country. Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. While our response must be robust, it must also remain true to our values as a liberal democracy that believes in the rule of law. Many Russians have made this country their home, abide by our laws, and make an important contribution to our country, which we must continue to welcome. But to those who seek to do us harm, my message is simple. You are not welcome here. Mr. Speaker, let me turn to our bilateral relationship. As I said on Monday, we have had a very simple approach to Russia: engage but beware. And I continue to believe it is not in our national interest to break off all dialogue between the United Kingdom and the Russian Federation. But in the aftermath of this appalling act against our country, this relationship cannot be the same. So we will suspend all planned high-level bilateral contacts between the United Kingdom and the Russian Federation. This includes revoking the invitation to Foreign Minister Lavrov to pay a reciprocal visit to the UK and confirming there will be no attendance by ministers or indeed members of the royal family at this summer's World Cup in Russia. Finally, Mr. Speaker, we will deploy a range of tools from across the full breadth of our national security apparatus in order to counter the threats of hostile state activity. While I have set out some of these measures today, members on all sides will understand that there are some that cannot be shared publicly for reasons of national security. And of course, there are other measures we stand ready to deploy at any time should we face further Russian provocation. Mr. Speaker, none of the actions we take are intended to damage legitimate activity or prevent contacts between our populations. We have no disagreement with the people of Russia, who have been responsible for so many great achievements throughout their history. Many of us looked at a post-Soviet Russia with hope. We wanted a better relationship, and it is tragic that President Putin has chosen to act in this way. But we will not tolerate the threat to life of British people and others on British soil from the Russian government, nor will we tolerate such a flagrant breach of Russia's international obligations. Mr. Speaker, as I set out on Monday, the United Kingdom does not stand alone in confronting Russian aggression. In the last 24 hours, I have spoken to President Trump, Chancellor Merkel and President Macron. We have agreed to cooperate closely in responding to this barbaric act and to coordinate our efforts to stand up for the rules-based international order which Russia seeks to undermine. I will also speak to other allies and partners in the coming days. And I welcome the strong expressions of support from NATO and from partners across the European Union and beyond. Later today in New York, the UN Security Council will hold open consultations where we will be pushing for a robust international response. We have also notified the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons about Russia's use of this nerve agent, and we are working with the police to enable the OPCW to independently verify our analysis. Mr. Speaker, this was not just an act of attempted murder in Salisbury, nor just an act against the UK. It is an affront to the prohibition on the use of chemical weapons, and it is an affront to the rules-based system on which we and our international partners depend. We will work with our allies and partners to confront such actions wherever they threaten our security at home and abroad, and I commend this statement to the House.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of her statement and echo absolutely her words about the service of our emergency and public services. The attack in Salisbury was an appalling act of violence. Nerve agents are abominable if used in any war. It is utterly reckless to use them in a civilian environment. This attack in Britain has concerned our allies in the European Union, NATO and the UN, and their words of solidarity have strengthened our position diplomatically. Our response as a country must be guided by the rule of law, support for international agreements and respect for human rights. So when it comes to the use of chemical weapons on British soil, it is essential that the government works with the United Nations to strengthen its chemical weapons monitoring system and involves the Office of the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. The Prime Minister said on Monday, either this was a direct act by the Russian state or the Russian government lost control of their potentially catastrophically damaging nerve agent and allowed it to get in the hands of others. Our response must be both decisive and proportionate and based on clear evidence. If the government believes that it is still a possibility that Russia negligently lost control of a military-grade nerve agent, what action is being taken through the OPCW with our allies? I welcome the fact the police are working with the OPCW. And has the Prime Minister taken the necessary steps under the Chemical Weapons Convention to make a formal request for evidence from the Russian government under Article 9.2? How has she responded to the Russian government's request for a sample of the agent used in the Salisbury attack to run its own tests? Has high-resolution trace analysis been run on a sample of the nerve agent, and has that revealed any evidence as to the location of its production or the identity of its perpetrators? And can the Prime Minister update the House on what conversations, if any, she has had with the Russian government? And while suspending planned high-level contacts, does the Prime Minister agree that it is essential to maintain a robust dialogue with Russia in the interest of our own and wider international security? With many countries, Mr. Speaker, speaking out alongside us, the circumstances demand that we build an international consensus to address the use of chemical weapons. We should urge our international allies to join us and call on Russia to reveal without delay full details of its chemical weapons programme to the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. It is, as we on these benches have expressed before, a matter of huge regret that our country's diplomatic capacity has been stripped back with cuts of 25% in the last 5 years. It is, Mr. Speaker,
The right honourable gentleman must be heard. There will be adequate opportunity for colleagues on both sides of the House to put questions. Members must be heard. Jeremy Corbyn.
I couldn't understand a word of what the Foreign Secretary just said, Mr. Speaker, but his behaviour demeans his office. It is in moments such as these that governments realise how vital strong diplomacy and political pressure are for our security and national interest. The measures we take have to be effective, not just for the long-term security of our citizens, but to secure a world free of chemical weapons. So can the Prime Minister outline what discussions she has had with our partners in the European Union, NATO and the UN, and what willingness there was to take multilateral action? While the poisonings, Mr. Speaker, of Sergei and Yulia Skripal are confronting us today, what efforts are being made by the government to reassess the death of Mr. Skripal's daughter, Ludmila, who died in 2012, and the deaths of his eldest brother and son, who have both died in the past 2 years? We have a duty to speak out against the abuse of human rights by the Putin government and its supporters, both at home and abroad. And I join many others in this House in paying tribute to the many campaigners in Russia for human rights and justice and democracy in that country. And Mr. Speaker, we must do more to address the dangers posed by the state's relationship with unofficial mafia-like groups and corrupt oligarchs. We must also expose the flows of ill-gotten cash between the Russian state and billionaires who become stupendously rich by looting their country and subsequently use London to protect their wealth. We welcome the Prime Minister's statement today, clearly committing to support the Magnitsky amendments and implementing them as soon as possible, as we on this side have long pushed for. Mr. Speaker, yesterday, Nikolai Glushkov, a Russian exile who was close friends with the late oligarch Boris Berezovsky, was found dead in his London home. What reassurance can she give to citizens of Russian origin living in Britain that they are safe here? Mr. Speaker, the events in Salisbury earlier this month are abominable and have been rightly condemned right across the House. Britain has to build a consensus with our allies, and we support the Prime Minister in... Mr. Speaker, we support the Prime Minister in taking multilateral action and firm action to ensure we strengthen the Chemical Weapons Convention, to ensure that this dreadful, appalling act, which we totally condemn, never happens again in our country.
The right honourable gentleman raised a number of questions around the nerve agent that had been used. He asked if we were putting together an international coalition to call on Russia to reveal the details of its chemical weapons programme to the OPCW. That is indeed what we did. We gave the Russian government the opportunity, through the démarche that my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, delivered to the Russian ambassador here in London earlier this week, to do just that. They have not done so. He's raised a number of questions. He asked about the corrupt elites and money going through London. As I said in my statement, led by the National Crime Agency, we will continue to bring all the capabilities of UK law enforcement to bear against serious criminals and corrupt elites. There is no place for these people or their money in our country, and that work is ongoing. He talked about getting an international consensus together. As I have said, I've spoken to Chancellor Merkel, to President Trump, to President Macron. Others have also expressed their support. Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary-General, said we stand in solidarity with our allies in the United Kingdom, and those responsible for both those who committed the crime and those who ordered it must face appropriately serious consequences. The NATO Council has expressed deep concern at the first offensive use of a nerve agent on alliance territory since NATO's foundation, and allies agreed the attack was a clear breach of international norms and agreements. And Donald Tusk, the President of the EU Council, said, "I express my full solidarity with PM Theresa May in the face of the brutal attack, inspired most likely by Moscow. I'm ready to put the issue on next week's European Council." So we will be doing that. But I say to the right honourable gentleman, this is not a question of our diplomacy, of what diplomatic support we have around the world. This is a question of the culpability of the Russian state for an act And he said that we should be trying to build a consensus. It's clear from the conversations I've had with allies that we have a consensus with our allies. It was clear from the remarks that were made by backbenchers across the whole of this House on Monday that there is a consensus across the backbenches of this House. I am only sorry that the consensus does not who could have taken the opportunity, as the UK government has done, to condemn the culpability of the Russian state.
Mr. Kenneth Clark.
Mr. Speaker, it seems to me, without any access to closed information, that the choice of this particularly bizarre and dreadful way of killing an individual is a deliberate choice by the Russian government to put their signature on a particular killing, so that other defectors are left in no doubt that it is the Russian government that will act if they're disappointed in any way by their actions. Now, in the light of that, the only sensible question that the Leader of the Opposition asked was what consultation we propose to have with NATO, the other European countries, with the American government, about positive action that could be taken to prevent this continuing defiance of international law with the defiance of all the rules on testing and possession of chemical weapons. It's not just a question of expressing our anger about Salisbury. This is actually a serious threat to the safety of the Western world, unless and until we all do something together to actually start getting the Russians to do something, as opposed to simply ignore us. Well
said. My right honourable friend and learned friend is absolutely right, and that is why we are not only talking to allies bilaterally, but there will, as I understand it, be a meeting of the NATO Council tomorrow, at which this issue will be considered. As the President of the EU Council has said, he will be putting this on the agenda of the European Union Council meeting at the end of next week. And my right honourable and learned friend is absolutely right. While we rightly initially focus on the use of this nerve agent here in the UK and its impact on us here in the UK, this is about the illegal use of chemical weapons by the Russian state. And it is about an illegal programme to in developing those chemical weapons by the Russian state. And we will leave no stone unturned in order to work with our allies to ensure that we respond appropriately to that.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and let me thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of her statement. As the Prime Minister has stated, the attack on Mr. Skripal and his daughter was an unlawful use of force by the Russian state against the United Kingdom. Mr. Speaker, there has to be a robust response to the use of terror on our streets. We must act in a measured way to show that we will simply not tolerate this behaviour. And in this regard, I welcome and associate with those of us in these benches with the measures contained in the statement. On this matter, I commit my party to working constructively with the government. I am sure the House will join me with extending thanks to the police and security services who are working round the clock on the recent case in Salisbury. Mr. Speaker, it has been warming to see our closest friends and allies across Europe expressing solidarity and support. Our friends globally must join with us by standing up to this abuse of state power by Russia. And I look forward to discussions in the United Nations. The United Nations must speak with a clear and an unambiguous voice. Mr. Speaker, the fact that we are expelling the largest number of undeclared intelligence officers in over 30 years is welcome, and is the desire to examine what can be done from a legislative perspective to defend against hostile state activity. As someone who has previously supported the so-called Majinsky measures, I am pleased that the government is signalling action in this area. And let me commend the actions of Bill Bowder, who I've had the opportunity to meet previously, someone that has been personally at massive risk and has stood up to the effects of Russian state power. Mr. Speaker, financial sanctions are welcome, and we must redouble our efforts against any money laundering by those responsible. It must be clear to the Russian authorities that we will not tolerate activities that infringe international law. Whilst we support the PM's actions, we will continue to scrutinise them carefully, and we must ensure proper scrutiny of any new proposed legislation. Our thoughts are with those in Russia who have suffered from abuse of state power. There is no doubt that that is what we are seeing. And in doing so, we look forward to a time where we can engage positively for a time of peace and cooperation. But the only response today must be a robust one towards the Kremlin and to Russia.
Can I Mr. Speaker, can I once again thank the right honourable gentleman for not just the tone of his response, but for the comments that he has made. Can I reassure him that, of course, any legislative proposals we bring forward will have due scrutiny in this House? Can I thank him for his constructive offer to work with the government on this issue, because it is a matter that should concern us across the whole House? And can I reassure him that, although I have made reference to a number of allies who have spoken in support of the United Kingdom in this, others have too. Canada, Australia, for example, have also been very clear that a robust response is appropriate to this. And once again, I welcome the comments made by the right honourable gentleman.
Mr. Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, may I commend my right honourable friend for her strong leadership and in rising to this challenge. As others have shown, they also, too, in positions of leadership, have risen to the challenge. I'm only sorry that others in such positions have fallen well short. Can I ask her, in the conversation she is due to have with her allies, as she's quite right to do, she may raise with the German government the issue of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline that they are engaged with the Russians, which will cut revenues from Ukraine and Eastern Europe and give Russia an unparalleled ability to bully those countries in the future. If Russia is, as we now believe, a rogue state, could she please try and persuade our allies in Europe and elsewhere not to treat with them and make them better off?
Well, I thank my right honourable friend, and can I say to him that I think one of the things that we will be discussing with our allies is how we can ensure that the robust message about the act that has taken place on UK soil is consistently given and continues to be given by all our allies. As regards Nord Stream 2, this is a matter that is regularly discussed at the European Union Council, as my right honourable friend would, I suspect, imagine.
Yvette Cooper.
Can I welcome the Prime Minister's statement? Her conclusion about the culpability of the Russian state is an immensely serious one, and that, in addition to their breaches of international law, of the use of chemical weapons, but also their continued disregard for the rule of law and for human rights, must be met with unequivocal condemnation. Welcome both the measures she's taken to downgrade the intelligence capability that the Russian state has, but also, in particular, the work that I understand has started with the United Nations. It is important to expose Russia and what they are doing within the United Nations and to build the broadest possible support against them. Can she say a bit more about what she is doing on that front?
Can I also thank the right honourable lady for the strength of the statement that she has just made, which I know is representative of many of her right honourable and honourable friends on the backbenches opposite. We are taking this matter to the United Nations. My right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, has already spoken to the UN Secretary-General about this issue. It will be part of an open discussion that is taking place tomorrow. That is the start of a process of looking at this issue. As I indicated in response to my right honourable and learned friend, Member for Rushcliffe, this is not just about the incident that has taken place here in the United Kingdom. It is about this use of chemical weapons, this illegal use of chemical weapons that has taken place, and the role of the Russian state in the development of chemical weapons contrary to international law.
Julian Lewis.
Mr. Speaker, no reasonable person can possibly doubt that the Russian government has behaved with arrogance, with inhumanity, and with contempt, not least in failing to respond to the Prime Minister's deadline, which it surely would have done if it had known it was innocent of this charge. In welcoming the Prime Minister's expulsion of 23 diplomats who are really intelligence agencies, will I ask her to make it clear that any retaliation in kind by the Russian government will be met by further expulsions, possibly including even the ambassador, who spends so much time coming to talk to us in this place, bemoaning the poor state of Anglo-Russian relations. And will she accept that Russia traditionally respects strength and despises weakness, and that the time has come to recognise that 2% of GDP is not enough to spend on defence when we are reverting to the sort of adversarial relationship when we used to spend a much higher proportion of GDP in ensuring that this country was well defended.
Can I thank my honourable friend for his remarks? As I said in my statement, in response to his first point, there are other measures we stand ready to deploy at any time should we face further Russian provocation. On the other point that he made, of course, as we have been looking through our national security capability review and our modernising defence programme review, what we are doing is ensuring that for the variety and diversity of threats that this country faces, we have the resources and the capabilities available to deal with those threats. But of course, as those threats diversify, not all of them will be responded to by what is conventionally normally considered to be defence.
Sir Vincent Cable.
Can I say that I and my party fully support the Prime Minister's statement? Can I ask, what is her response to the brave leader of the opposition in Russia, Alexei Navalny, who is not allowed to stand in the presidential election, who has said that the most effective action the British government can take is to use its legal powers, such as the unexplained wealth orders, against named individuals who are critical to the Putin operation. And she names in particular Mr. Alisher Usmanov, who has substantial property and sporting interests, and the first Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Igor Shivalov, who, amongst other things, owns a £14 million flat overlooking the Ministry of Defence. Will she act?
Well, can I thank the right honourable gentleman for the support that he has given to the actions being taken by the government. Can I also say to him, as I did in my statement, that we do, of course, look at issues around corrupt elites, we look at the issues around criminal finances, we look at using the tools and capabilities that are at our disposal. The National Crime Agency is continuing in that work.
Tom Tugendhat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I thank the Prime Minister for her impressive leadership in this matter. I associate myself, actually, unusually with the leader of the Liberal Democrats in calling for more use of unexplained wealth orders. But could I also ask her if she will use the tools at her disposal to expose the wealth of the Putin family? $300 billion or more has been stolen from the Russian people by that man. We should expose him for what he is and not be a useful idiot hiding behind legalism of his crimes.
Can I thank my honourable friend for his contribution and suggestion? Can I also say on the unexplained wealth orders, of course, those are tools that we do use, but we have to use these properly in accordance with the rule of law, following the due processes that should take place.
Ms. Kendall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister's statement, agree with her analysis, and fully support the government's actions. I understand that the Foreign Office has called for an urgent meeting of the UN Security Council. What does the Prime Minister think the result of this is likely to be, given that one permanent member of the Council is engaging in unlawful attacks on another? And does she share my concerns that Russia's actions in this country, in Ukraine, and in backing Assad's murderous regime in Syria means that the current Security Council mechanism is broken.
Can I say thank the Honourable Lady for her comments, and also say, as I said earlier, the Foreign Secretary did speak to the UN Secretary-General yesterday, and later today in New York the UN Security Council will hold initial consultations. Obviously Russia is a member of that Security Council, but I think it's important that we continue to use the international organisations that are available to us. The United Nations is a protector of the international rules-based order. That's what it should be, and we will be continuing to press for a robust international response.
Mr. Andrew Mitchell.
It's clear that almost unanimously across the House there is support for my right honourable friend's proportionate and right response to this crisis. In particular, she's absolutely right to use the mechanisms of the United Nations to make clear to everyone what has happened in this case. And will she also bear in mind that in Syria, Russia has either indirectly or directly authorised and used chemical weapons? And may I also thank her for what she has said about the Magnitsky Amendment, which many of us across the House have been working for some time now. I hope that she will give consideration for implementing the full Magnitsky Amendment as it has been implemented in America and in Canada.
Can I first of all say to my right honourable friend, and it picks up a point that was actually made from the previous question, that this isn't simply one act we see from Russia. This is a pattern of actions by Russia where they are undertaking in a variety of ways different actions. Of course, what we see them doing in Syria, what we've seen them doing by the illegal annexation of Crimea and their activities in the Donbass. We also see their use of propaganda, their attempt to interfere in elections across the continent of Europe. These are all the actions that the Russian state is getting involved in. And in response to the second point, we will bring forward a government amendment to reflect the Magnitsky considerations and to ensure that we have got the strongest possible means to deal with these issues.
Sammy Wilson.
We welcome the decisive action which has been taken by the Prime Minister today, and it sits in contrast with the policy of appeasement that we have heard from the front bench of the Labour Party. And I am sure that the people of the United Kingdom are pleased that it is the Prime Minister who is standing behind that dispatch box today, defending the rule of law and the citizens of this country. However, she has told us that she has spoken to our allies over the last couple of days. Perhaps she could tell us, apart from words of support, what actions have they committed to ensure that, first of all, a message is sent out about this action and actions in the future?
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for his remarks and for the support of the DUP for the action that the government is taking on this matter. And can I say to him that in relation to the actions to be taken by international allies, of course they were waiting for us to announce the various actions that we were taking, the decision taken by the National Security Council this morning, but we will be holding further discussions with our allies about the way in which they can support what we are doing by actions themselves.
Mr. Dominic Grieve.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I entirely agree with the approach adopted by my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, in how she's responded to this outrageous attack. She agreed with me that the difficulty we face is not so much in getting the concurrence of our allies in agreeing on the nature of the outrage, but how we are going to craft a sustained strategy so that those of us who believe in the rules-based international system can apply the necessary leverage and persuasion on Russia to conform to it. And that the very serious risk that we run is that if we don't succeed in doing this, the level of violence that Russia is going to exercise with impunity against other states and us will simply increase. And that this is something which our allies in particular must have regard to if we are going to make any progress.
Well, my right honourable and learned friend is absolutely correct that this is an issue which we need to address in that wider sense, because it is about the way in which the Russian state is acting, it believes, with impunity in a whole variety of ways, the way in which it is flouting the international rules-based order. We must come together as allies to ensure that we are supporting that international rules-based order and that we have not just a collective agreement, but a collective approach which ensures that we can challenge what Russia is doing. But he's also right. One of the points I think we should be making to our allies is that this may have happened in the United Kingdom, but actually it is something that could be happening in any of these states.
Hilary Benn.
Indeed, Mr. Speaker, I join others in welcoming the measures that the Prime Minister has announced today. As Russia has chosen to act against us in such an outrageous way, we have to demonstrate our determination to defend ourselves. Given that Russia's usual response is to deny all responsibility for such actions, as well as seeking the assistance of the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons in identifying the sample, does she intend, as any member state is entitled to do, to ask for that organisation to carry out an investigation, including an inspection of any facilities or locations in Russia where this nerve agent, in all probability, was produced?
Well, can I say to the right honourable gentleman that we will be talking to the OPCW about a number of ways in which not just the sample of the nerve agent used here in the United Kingdom can be independently verified, but other actions that the OPCW might be able to take.
Sir Nicholas Soames.
May I welcome the decision of the government to refer the patiently and carefully acquired evidence of this grotesque attack to the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. Is it her intention that their findings should be referred both to the Russians, to the United Nations and to ourselves? And will she consider, in the light of that finding, go further on unexplained wealth orders and other financial sanctions against Russia if necessary?
Can I say to my right honourable friend that, of course, we are asking the OPCW to independently verify this so that it can be clear to everyone the nature of this nerve agent. Can I also say to him that, as I've said earlier in response to the unexplained wealth orders, these are things which we do operate, we do use, and we have introduced, but we will always ensure that they are done on evidence and, obviously, we operate according to the rule of law.
Margaret Hodge.
Can I welcome the Prime Minister's clear statement and her condemnation of the Russians and the action she's taken? And can I in particular welcome the fact that she is adopting the Magnitsky Amendment now from the government? But can I say to her, too much money is being laundered out of Russia and finding its way into the British system. And there are two things she could do pretty quickly which would help to tackle that. In the first place, she could bring forward the public register of ownership of properties, which was promised by her predecessor in 2015 and has been delayed by this government. And in the second place, she could increase transparency in our corporate structures so we would know who forms companies here, where the money comes from, and deal with it if it's illicit money brought in by unsavoury people.
Can I say to the right honourable lady, in relation to the issue that she's raised about the transparency in relation to property ownership, that is something that I have discussed with the Business Secretary. We haven't been delaying that. We do need to ensure that we get that right when we introduce it, but we have been discussing the timing for introducing that, because we do want to ensure we've got all the tools in our locker that we can use and can help us in this in the endeavour that we're engaged in.
Nicky Morgan.
I want to absolutely 100% support the Prime Minister's statement and the actions that she is taking. And to follow up just from the last question, I want to particularly pick up on the Prime Minister's statement that there is no place for serious criminals and corrupt elites or their money in our country. There are amendments which I'm sure Parliament will support, but will the Prime Minister also bear in mind that the select committees could have a real role here in teasing out information, what is going on, to tackle dirty money in this country, whether in the City of London or elsewhere, to bring evidence to the House that could shape amendments and actions the government could then take?
Well, can I thank my right honourable friend for her suggestion? Can I say that I recognise the role that select committees can play. I suspect my right honourable friend has just set up a stream of work for her own Treasury Select Committee to undertake.
Bradshaw.
Can I assure the Prime Minister that most of us on these benches fully support the measures that she has announced today? And indeed, some of us think they could have come a bit sooner. On the wider issue of Putin's hybrid warfare against our country, will she task the intelligence and security services to investigate Putin's influencing operations in our universities, in our think tanks, in our financial institutions and in our political parties?
Well, can I say to the right honourable gentleman, he raises an important issue about the propaganda activities that are being undertaken by the Russian state, and I will certainly look at the suggestion that he's made.
Mr. Simon Hoare.
Mr. Speaker, we should all be thanking God today that it's my right honourable friend in her place and not the so-called alternative. Absolutely right. I'm not expecting my right honourable friend to comment on the detail, but this morning, residents in my constituency, Hyde Road in Gillingham, saw the Metropolitan Police and the Army in place, the street in lockdown, removing vehicles and items linked to the Salisbury incident. I'm not expecting my right honourable friend to give a running commentary on current operations, but could she confirm two things? First, that she and the government and the security services are doing all that they can to keep my constituents safe, and can she arrange for somebody to provide a briefing to me as the Member of Parliament as to precisely what's happening?
Can I say to my honourable friend, I'm very happy to do that. As he will be aware, the police investigation does continue, and we cannot say where that investigation is going to take the police in terms of their further inquiries, but I will ensure that he is provided with a briefing as the Member of Parliament.
Chris Bryant.
I completely support everything that the Prime Minister has said today. The truth is that under Putin, the Russian Federation has managed to combine all the worst facets of communism and all the worst facets of rampant capitalism, all wrapped up inside a national security state, which keeps its people poor and kills his political opponents. Can I just ask about the Russian ambassador? Because since he arrived here 7 years ago, Alexander Yakovenko, he has repeatedly lied to parliamentarians. He has tried to get the Speaker to stop debates on Russia happening in this House. He has tried to interfere in the internal elections of this House. And surely to God, it is time we now told him that we will order our affairs in this country, not him, and he can go home.
Well, just to say to the right honourable gentleman, he's absolutely right. We will order our affairs in this country, and we will not be told what to do by a Russian ambassador. And I fully expect the House authorities to ensure that it is not possible for an external party such as that to interfere in elections in this House. And can I also say that it's a brave man who tries to tell the Speaker of the House of Commons what to do and to stand anything down.
I must say, for the avoidance of doubt, he got absolutely nowhere with me. You can be sure about that. Anna Soubry.
Mr. Speaker, it is noticeable that the length and breadth of this place has completely supported not just the wise words and the leadership of the Prime Minister, but also her firm actions, with a notable exception of the front bench of the opposition. And that is a shameful moment. But, Mr. Speaker, further to the question asked by the Honourable Member for Exeter, democracy is a fundamental British value, and there have been long-held concerns that Russia has been seeking to undermine it and interfere in it. If those concerns now turn to evidence, will she take equally robust action against Russia to ensure that our great British democracy continues to be protected?
Well, I'm very happy to give the assurance to my right honourable friend of the action that we take. We recognise that the first duty of government is to safeguard the nation, and we treat security and integrity of our democratic processes, as of everything else in this country, very seriously. In terms of disinformation that is used by the Kremlin, we know that they persistently use this to destabilise perceived enemies, and managing this is a long-term priority for the UK. We'll continue to work not just as the UK, but to work with our international partners on efforts to counter this.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
Alongside many colleagues in this House, I speak on behalf of my party in calling for a robust and immediate response. Sources inform us that Russia is the UK's biggest weapons-grade nuclear substances export market. This is despite several attempts at a moratorium on depleted uranium by the European Parliament and the United Nations. Will the Prime Minister confirm whether the UK is still exporting nuclear substances to Russia? And if so, surely this should be among the very first sanctions imposed.
Can I thank the Honourable Lady for the remarks that she's made and for the support that she has given from her party for the actions that the government is taking. What we have been talking about today, of course, is the use of a nerve agent, of a chemical weapon on UK soil, and the blatant flouting of the international rules-based order and the legal structure around those uses.
When I served as Security Minister and my right honourable friend was Home Secretary, I became aware both of her outstanding determination and dedication and of the commitment and expertise of our security services and the police that deal with counter-terrorism. She knows, as the House knows, that that is led for the Metropolitan Police. But of course this event happened in Salisbury and could have happened in Berkshire or Lincolnshire. Will she ask the Home Secretary look at whether our local police forces are, given the dynamic nature of these threats, equipped and informed adequately to deal with them in the first instance?
Prime Minister. As a former Security Minister, of course, my right honourable friend has a particular understanding of these issues. Can I say to him that, of course, the ability to bring in the capabilities of the counter-terrorism police, who of course don't just operate in the Metropolitan Police, as he knows, but have regional bases around the country as well, is part of the layered structure that we have in relation to police forces. But I'm sure my right honourable friend will be making sure that the police look at the immediate response that they had to this incident to ensure that we certainly don't want to see an incident of this type happening again on United Kingdom soil. And that's why we're giving a very clear message to the Russian state. But we do want to ensure that all our police forces are aware of threats that they may face.
Mike Gapes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister's words were appropriate, measured and correct, and she has my full support. She mentioned dirty money from Russia. Can she look again at the role of the tax havens internationally, including those in British overseas territories and Crown dependencies?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his remarks. Can I say to him that, as he knows, we have been taking a number of measures in relation to financial activities in the British overseas territories and dependencies, and we continue to press on those. And of course, we have enhanced our ability to deal with these issues here in relation to economic crime through the formation of the National Economic Crime Centre, which I'm pleased to say, obviously having formed the National Crime Agency, we have now set up that National Economic Crime Centre as part of the NCA, which brings a number of capabilities together to deal with these issues.
Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents of Harlow will strongly, I think, be reassured by the way you are guarding the nation's security. Could I ask my honourable friend to condemn the remarks of President Putin, who attacked Jews and other nations for the meddling in the United States elections? And could I ask her, given that she's also said about possible rogue use of these chemical weapons, what is the prospect of such chemical weapons ending up in the hand of extreme Islamists?
Can I say to my honourable friend, first of all, I also condemn the remarks that he has referred to that were made in relation to certain communities in the United States. Can I say to my honourable friend, in relation to the second part of his question, what we are talking about here is a nerve agent that was developed as part of a chemical weapons programme by the Russian state. And I think that will give him a clear message in relation to this.
Derek Twigg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I fully support what the Prime Minister said in the statement and also for the actions she outlined today? Mr. Speaker, can I ask the Prime Minister this? I have some concerns about whether we have in place a proper strategy to combat chemical weapons attacks against this country, and particularly these small-tail attacks. And it's joined up with both security services, governments and the armed forces. Could the Prime Minister give me some reassurance or tell me whether actually work is continuing to improve that?
Yes, well, we do have, obviously this is an issue that we do look at, and we do have a strategy in place, but we will of course ensure, given what has happened, we will review that, we will look again to make sure that we have the best possible opportunity to ensure that this cannot happen again.
Mr. Crispin-Blunt.
Whilst welcoming the Prime Minister's statement, as almost everyone else has, can I join with the Right Honourable Member for Beaconsfield about the importance of the international rule of law and say that this is a very important moment of decision for China to decide which side she is going to sit on in this arrangement. And can I urge my Right Honourable friend to make sure we take the most energetic steps to ensure that China stands with the rest of the civilised world on the side of law and responsibility.
Thank my honourable friend for raising this issue in this way. We want to see the maximum possible adherence to the international rules-based order across the whole world. In different contexts, this is a matter that I raised when I was in China recently.
This is an extremely important parliamentary occasion, and I think it's understandable that very large numbers of members should want to question the Prime Minister. Can I very politely suggest to colleagues that they should seek to ensure that their questions are as succinct as the Prime Minister's replies have been, and that way we might get through a very great many more quickly than we otherwise would. Chris Leslie.
Support to the measures the Prime Minister has announced and the condemnation of what is increasingly looking like a rogue state. On this question of the integrity of the United Nations Security Council, we must now begin to talk about reform. Russia cannot be allowed to simply sit pretty, thumbing its nose at the rest of the world community and feeling it is immune from the rule of law internationally. Will she initiate that sort of reform discussion with the General Secretary?
And I once again thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for the remarks he's made today and the support he's given to the government as he did on Monday. In relation to the question, we do talk to the United Nations about reform of the United Nations in a whole variety of ways. Of course, any decision, the catch-22, if you like, is that any decision that might be taken in the Security Council to reform it, of course, could be subject to a veto by Russia, who are sitting there. But the point has been raised not just by the Right Honourable Gentleman, but by others, and this is something that we will look at.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has underlined to the House that the Russian state has either been utterly reckless at best or directly complicit at worst in the deployment of a harmful substance on our soil. Can I ask her, in the statement, she said that she would be taking new measures to harden our defences against hostile state activity. With that in mind, will she ensure that appropriate balance is provided between counter-terrorism and counter-espionage to ensure that our excellent security and intelligence agencies are appropriately focused to combat and directly disrupt those who would cause harm in our country?
Can I say to my Right Honourable friend, who also as a former Security Minister has a particular knowledge and understanding of these issues, that I entirely take the point that he has made, and we do, indeed, we do constantly ensure that the balance is right between counter-terrorism and counter-espionage, and we will, of course, continue to ensure that that balance is maintained properly.
McFadden.
Thank you. Responding with strength and resolve when your country is under threat is an essential component of political leadership. There is a Labour tradition that understands that, and it has been understood by Prime Ministers of all parties who have stood at that dispatch box. That means when chemical weapons are used, we need more than words but deeds. And can I ask the Prime Minister then what more she can do to enhance our solidarity with our allies, particularly at a time when there are nationalist forces trying to drive wedges between democratic countries, some of those forces backed and supported by the Russians themselves?
Can I first of all say to the Right Honourable Gentleman that he is, of course, absolutely right, that there is a strong tradition in the Labour Party of recognising the importance of acting in the national interest and acting when our national security is under threat. And we have seen that from governments. We've seen that from governments of all complexions over the years. In relation to the point about the international activity and the deeds that we need to take, it is right. We will be continuing to talk. We have been speaking to our allies even before this event took place, about the ways in which we could deal and address some of the activities and actions that Russia is taking across the continent of Europe and elsewhere. But we will, of course, redouble those efforts now.
And John Whittingdale.
Does my right friend agree that one of the best assets we have against Russian disinformation and propaganda is the BBC World Service? Will she look at ways in which we can extend the reach of the World Service, perhaps by incorporating world television? And does she also agree that we need to be very careful not to give any pretext, however unjustified, for the Russians to take action against BBC and other free media outlets?
I would hope that the Russian state would be prepared to accept the importance of free media. Sadly, from one or two things that we heard last night, that may not continue. That may not be the case. But my right honourable friend is right that the broadcasting of the BBC, of the World Service, is an important element of the reach that the United Kingdom can have, but it's an important part of actually helping those people who believe in democracy and the rule of law and free speech and expression to have an outlet which is doing just that.
Alison Thewlis.
Mr Speaker, I was glad to hear that the Prime Minister mentioned the sanctions and anti-money laundering bill, and I welcome the commitment to the Magnitsky Amendment. But she will understand that many opaque SLPs and LLPs are engaged in money laundering from Russia via Azerbaijan, Georgia and the Ukraine through this country. Will she speak to Cabinet colleagues and also look at bringing forward amendments to the sanctions and anti-money laundering bill to tackle these corrupt elites, as she put it, because money laundering is happening via Companies House at the moment?
I think we got the thrust of it.
I say to the Honourable Lady that the question of money laundering is one that we do take very seriously. We have been working for some time now, both with law enforcement but also with the financial sector, on ways in which we can improve the action that we're taking against money laundering. And this is one of the things that I expect the National Economic Crime Centre to be looking at very closely.
Mr Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I strongly welcome the action that my right honourable friend has announced today. One way that Russia seeks to extend its influence in Europe is by building relationships of energy dependence. Is my right honourable friend aware that recently Britain has started to receive shipments of liquefied natural gas, but does she agree with me that Britain shouldn't provide a market for Russian gas? If we do need to bring in extra LNG imports, then we have allies like Qatar, Malaysia, Australia, who are more than willing to sell it to us.
Can I reassure my right honourable friend that when we are looking to our gas supplies, we are indeed looking to other countries?
Veron Coker.
Can I say to the Prime Minister, I am another one who supports the statement that she's made today as a strong advocate for the defence and security of our country. Can I also draw attention to something I don't want to get lost, what the Prime Minister said, which was while our response must be robust, it must also remain true to our values. And as such, would the Prime Minister perhaps say a little bit about something that I think she's done, which is not to say that we're going to ban Russia today, which actually I think is a strong point to make. This country believes in a free media. We're not frightened of it. We'll hear opinions that are against us, but we also believe in the rule of law and democracy.
The right honourable gentleman is right. We do believe in the rule of law and democracy, and we do believe in free media. Of course, the question of the status of Russia today in broadcasting in the United Kingdom is not a matter for the government. It is a matter for the independent Ofcom to consider.
Richard Graham.
The Prime Minister was absolutely right to say that our argument is not with the Russian people, but with the Russian state that has sponsored murder on our streets. Today, we've heard absolute solidarity from across the Western world and most political parties. But what statement of support has my right honourable friend received from the one political party which gives unequivocal 100% backing for the leader of the opposition, the Communist Party of Great Britain?
I have to say to my honourable friend, I don't believe I have received any such statement from the Communist Party of Great Britain, although I did notice I did notice that, I think a matter of 1 or 2 weeks ago, they did say that they weren't going to be standing candidates against where the Labour Party was standing, and that they now felt more comfortable in working with the Labour Party.
Sir Edward Davey.
Strongly welcome the Prime Minister's statement, but urge her to go further and, like others, use energy policy as a new way of attacking this Russian threat. While there are significant British energy interests in Russia, and we all acknowledge that, can she confirm that Putin's military and intelligence assets are primarily funded by the sale of Russian fossil fuels? Can I therefore commend her to look at the EU's energy security strategy, which is largely written in London and is reducing Europe's dependency on Russian fossil fuels?
The point that the right honourable gentleman makes, which has been made by other members across the House, is about the extent to which Russia uses its energy as a means to influence and to have an impact on those countries that are in receipt of it, and also the finances that it provides from what is an important one. And I can assure him that as we will be continuing to discuss with the European Union not just our energy security, but that wider energy security issue.
Many members of this and the other House are members of multilateral parliamentary organisations. Like the Council of Europe and the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, would my right honourable friend agree that a way we can help get behind her leadership and the government's position on this is to, when we attend events, to get the message across, to explain the policies of this government, to explain what has happened and why our allies should be supporting us?
I say to my right honourable friend, I think he has raised an extremely valuable point, and I welcome that suggestion and would encourage him and other members of this House in those multilateral organisations to do just that.
Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will know that I don't shy away from criticising the government's international policies where they get it wrong, but she should know that she has my full and unequivocal support for the measures she set out today. Particularly in light of the revelations coming out of the Mueller inquiry and in light of some of the other questions we've heard today, will the Prime Minister assure us that she will leave no stone unturned when examining the Russian state's attempts to subvert our parliamentary democracy, whether by human assets, financial, cyber, propaganda, other means, however uncomfortable some of those findings may be for us?
Well, I'm very happy to give that commitment to the honourable gentleman, to thank him for the comments that he has made today. I know that he is not backwards in coming forwards when he wishes to criticise the government, but he has given support to the government not just today but on Monday as well, and I welcome that and thank him for it.
Maggie Through.
Mr. Speaker, I too welcome my right honourable friend's clear, decisive actions that she's taken. Can she reassure the British citizens who are looking to travel to Russia over the coming weeks and months that regular updates will be provided by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and their safety will be paramount?
I can give that assurance to my honourable friend, and I suggest to those who do wish to travel to Russia that they do ensure that they are checking the Foreign Office advice. My understanding is that the travel advice has not changed at this stage, but of course people should check that travel advice before they move.
John Woodcock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a day for the House to speak as one for the nation, and she will be reassured to hear that a clear majority of Labour MPs, alongside the leaders of every other party, support the firm stance which she is taking. Can I ask, is she prepared that this situation will probably get more difficult before it gets better? And is she prepared to stay the course to face down this international bully and wrecker of our liberty and the rule of law across the world?
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for the remarks that he has made today, as indeed he made a very strong statement on Monday in this House as well. Can I assure him that I and this government will stay the course? As I said in my statement, we recognise there may be further Russian provocation. If there is, we have further measures that we can deploy in relation to that. But I think it is important that we, and we will be encouraging our international allies to do this too, recognise that this is an important moment to stand up and say to Russia, no, you cannot do this.
Sir Desmond Swain.
Russian economy is a fraction, but their expenditure on offensive capability a multiple of ours. Is there a lesson there?
Well, can I say to my right honourable friend that, of course, we do constantly look at the resources that we are putting in to ensure our national security, which, of course, is assured across a number of departments in government, and we continue to do so.
Luciana Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I welcome the Prime Minister's robust response which he set out today? Further to the confirmation that no minister or member of the royal family will be attending the World Cup this summer, does she believe that this should also extend to senior FA officials? And will she ask our NATO and EU allies to join us in this endeavour?
I think the attendance and at sporting events is a matter for the sporting authorities. It is a matter for them. They will be aware of the statement that I have made today. They will be aware that we are saying that no ministers or members of the royal family will be attending the World Cup, and I'm sure they will want to be considering their position.
Mr. Nigel Evans.
As chair of the Interparliamentary Union last year, I led a delegation to St. Petersburg and was met with great warmth and hospitality by many Russian people. Will she stress that our opposition is not with them, it is with their appalling leadership? And also that the Russian ambassador has made it clear that we can now expect retaliation. Will she send a clear signal to him and Moscow that the United Kingdom will not be threatened?
Well, can I first of all say to my right honourable friend, I'm grateful to him for the remarks that he has made. And I think last night I saw the Russian ambassador being quoted as saying that Russia was not a country that accepted ultimatums. Well, I can say to my right honourable friend and others, the United Kingdom is not a country that accepts threats, and we will stand up against them.
Mr. Peter Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister's reminder that we have no argument whatsoever with the peoples of the Russian Federation, who, after all, are living under Putin's dictatorship all the time. Inevitably, the action that has to be taken against Putin will make it more difficult for organisations that seek to maintain good relations with the ordinary people of the Russian Federation. Is there anything more the government can do to help these organisations to continue their good work, even while we're invoking more strict and robust sanctions against their dictator leader?
I think what is important, that both in my statement, and this was the point my right honourable friend made in his previous question, that we are very clear that we have no argument with the Russian people. It is with the Russian state, it is with the Russian government and their actions that we are concerned. And I think in the response that we give, it is important that we make that clear, not just in our words, but in our actions. And that's why what I've talked about today is a response that affects the Russian state and the Russian government and not the Russian people.
John Barron.
When it comes to the longer term, given the actions of the Russian state under President Putin, hasn't the time now come to have a fundamental reassessment of our defence spending, in collaboration preferably with our allies, but alone if not?
Can I say to my honourable friend, as he will know, we are one of the limited number of countries within NATO that maintains our commitment to spending 2% of our GDP on defence. We do have, as I'm sure he's aware, the modernising defence programme that is being undertaken at the moment alongside the National Security Capability Review. It is important that we are able to deal with the variety of threats that we face. But I will say to my honourable friend, as I have to other members of this House, that in looking at how we deal with those threats, not all of them will be dealt with in a way that would conventionally be considered as a matter for the Ministry of Defence.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has rightly said that the attacks in Britain have been part of an ongoing contempt of Britain, contempt of the rule of law, and contempt of our values. But it has also been a contempt of our alliances, both political and military. In moving forward, will the Prime Minister work with those political and military alliances so that together we have a root and branch removal of Russian interference in our political, our education and our financial institutions? Let this be a marker. No more. Now they will fear what we will do to hit back on the interference they have shown us.
Thank you, and I thank the honourable lady for the commitment that she has shown as a parliamentarian to the alliance we have through NATO, which is very important to us, is the bedrock of European defence, and I will certainly say that we will continue to work through those alliances to ensure that we are sending a very clear message that this is not acceptable.
Francois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I commend the Prime Minister on her decisive and vigorous action in response to what was, after all, an attack on the United Kingdom? In some ways, it had flashes of the Iron Lady about it. but it was also in stark contrast to the attitude of the Leader of the Opposition, who simply could not bring himself to condemn Russia for this outrageous act. He simply couldn't do it. And is that not because he remains at heart what he has always been, a CND badge-wearing apologist for the Russian state?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, I think that people will take their own conclusions from what they have heard today. But I can also say to my honourable friend that I'm sure he, as I do, take a great reassurance from the positive messages of support that have come from the Labour backbenches.
Phil Wilson.
Mr. Speaker, our way of life in this country and in the West is based on democracy, human rights and the rule of law, and should be defended.
Outrageous.
Strongly held opinions have been expressed. Everybody can consult the record, and I understand that there is an intensity of feeling, but the honourable gentleman member for Sedgefield must have his question heard, and then the answer will be heard. Phil Wilson.
Our way of life in this country and in the West is based on human rights, democracy and the rule of law, and should be defended. And that's why the Prime Minister is right to bring forward these sanctions against the state, that a state that doesn't actually believe in those principles. Can the Prime Minister give a commitment to come back to the House if she feels the need for further consideration of sanctions should be made?
The honourable gentleman has raised an important point. I did say in my statement that we had further measures that we might wish to deploy if we were subject to further Russian provocation. And, of course, if we choose to do so, I will come back to this House.
Sir Christopher Chope.
Mr. Speaker, does my right honourable friend accept that the actions of the Russian Federation are totally incompatible with membership of the Council of Europe, which believes in democracy, human rights and the rule of law? Will my right honourable friend therefore ensure that we can expel Russia from the Council of Europe as a reprisal, because its continuing membership of the Council of Europe seems to fly in the face of our commitment to those important values?
My honourable friend has raised an important point. Can I simply say to him, I don't think it's within the hands only of the United Kingdom to expel Russia from the Council of Europe, but as he will have heard our right honourable friend, the member for Newbury, making the point that members of this House who are members of such multilateral groupings should, I think, be making every effort to make the point about the illegitimate activity that has been undertaken by Russia.
Emma Reynolds.
Speaker, I welcome very much the Prime Minister's statement today and the measures that she has announced, which will only be strengthened if our allies take similar action. Can she say more about NATO and whether she will be bringing together NATO heads of state and government to discuss a coordinated response?
As I think I said earlier in a response, I believe the NATO Council will be meeting tomorrow to discuss this particular issue, and I will be talking to a number of allies who are within NATO about coordination of the response. As I also said earlier in response to a previous question, of course they have been waiting to hear for the details of our response, which I brought first to Parliament.
Seeley.
Speaker, the Prime Minister is clearly aware that the Kremlin is using a very full spectrum of tools in what it considers to be its new generation warfare against the West. Assassination is one element of that. Is the Prime Minister aware of the important work which was done in the 70s and 80s by the Senate Intelligence Committee in the United States to methodically expose Russian or Kremlin subversion? It's called active measures, activna meropриятия. Will she consider something similar for this country now? Because the light of truth and shining that light on truth on Russian subversion today, however one calls it, is a critical part of defending democracy and undermining Russian subversion. Thank you.
Yes. Well, can I say to my honourable friend that I wasn't aware of the details of the work of the Senate committee that he has referred to, but it is the case that this is a government which is not afraid to call out Russian actions in public when we see those actions taking place. But I take the point that he's making about a more detailed and forensic look at the activities of the Russian state, and I will certainly consider that.
Penny Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In supporting the Prime Minister's strategy, can I remind her, though, that during the Putin years he has become emboldened, sometimes because our allies, the Europeans and internationally, have not always been prepared to face down that kind of aggression relative to their commercial interests. If we are going to stay the course, can you remind our allies they are as much at threat as we have been with this act of state terror?
The honourable gentleman makes a very important point. This may have happened on UK soil today. It could have happened in any one of a number of countries, and I think it's important. And other countries are themselves seeing other actions being taken by Russia, such as attempts to interfere in elections and propaganda and disinformation campaigns. And it's important that we do, as far as possible, work together.
Dame Gerald Gillen.
I also add my support to the Prime Minister for the cool, calm, collected and correct way she has responded to a very serious threat to this country. Would she be pleased to know that both the First Minister of Wales and the First Minister in Scotland have both tweeted their support for the Prime Minister and the action she has taken? And will she undertake to always keep the devolved administrations fully informed of what is happening?
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for letting me know of the tweets that have been put out by the First Ministers in Scotland and in Wales. I'm pleased to say I will be meeting both of those First Ministers later this afternoon, both for bilaterals and in the JMC plenary meeting, and I certainly undertake, we have been keeping the devolved administrations aware of what we were doing, and I certainly undertake to continue to do that.
Mr. David Hanson.
The Prime Minister has correct in this matter. Could she, though, also look at the issue of transport of materials and assets from other countries? Because material will very often not go direct from Moscow to London. And will she ensure that our European partners and NATO partners take the same action if evidence leads to that conclusion?
That is an important point that has been raised. We will be looking at the issue of movement of materials and, indeed, as I indicated in my statement, looking at further action we can be taking in relation not just to movement of materials but of people as well. And this is something that we would, of course, be discussing with our allies.
Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has such widespread support because she has learnt the lesson of history that tyrants must be stood up to. And can I encourage her to impose a freeze on assets so that people don't have the opportunity of taking them out of the country in the short term, and to boost the military resources in Estonia, where we have 800 troops already, to show very tangibly that we will support our friends and allies who may also be at risk from Russia?
I thank my honourable friend for his remarks. As I said in my statement, we will freeze Russian state assets wherever we have the evidence that they may be used to threaten the life or property of UK nationals or residents. I was pleased to be able to visit the troops that we had in Estonia last September. We are, of course, there with other allies, and I was pleased that at the Anglo-French summit that we held in January, President Macron committed to a continuing contingent of French troops joining our troops in Estonia. It is an important symbol that we collectively have of our determination to protect the West against Russia.
Sarah Jones.
Can I welcome the Prime Minister's statement? Given the inevitable focus over recent years on ISIS and the terrorism that we've seen at home, is the Prime Minister content that across government, the Home Office, the security services and other agencies, we have enough specific Russian expertise as well as enough resource, or do we need to increase that expertise given this event and many others that show that the Russian government are intent on undermining our democracy?
Well, the Honourable Lady is right that in recent years there has been an appropriate and correct focus on counter-terrorism, but that doesn't mean that we haven't been looking at hostile state activity and haven't been looking at counter-espionage measures, because we indeed have. We keep these in balance as we go forward, as we assess the threats that we're facing, and will continue to do so.
Vicky Ford.
Mr. Speaker, ever since Russian troops first entered Ukraine, friends from many different countries have told me how false news stories emanating from Russian sources have been used to aggressively influence public opinion and undermine legitimate democracies. They use social media platforms and traditional media. Hybrid warfare is a key part of this. Will you call, Prime Minister, can you call for an international strategy to deal with hybrid warfare? Can it be on the EU agenda next week and discussed at the NATO summit in July?
I can say to my honourable friend that the issue of Russian use of disinformation and propaganda is something that I have already raised at the European Union Council at previous meetings and would expect to raise this again. We do recognise the importance of the work that is being done by the Kremlin in terms of disinformation campaigns. Managing this is a long-term priority for the UK, but in doing that we will of course work with our international allies.
Colleagues were willing to imitate the legendary succinctness of the Right Honourable Gentleman Member for New Forest West in terms of the format of question. We could probably accommodate everybody, but if there are going to be mini speeches, some might lose out. Gavin Robinson.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've listened very carefully on travel advice and advice for FA officials. The Prime Minister will remember the pitched battles in Paris that English supporters faced. Will she reappraise the protection and the security that will be afforded to them if they travel?
Really good question. Yes, we will of course look at the security and protection of any UK football fans who are travelling.
To support very strongly the Prime Minister's robust position, does she recall the enormous efforts made during John Major's government to build good relations with Russia? Indeed, John Major went to see President Yeltsin. I was lucky enough to go with him. And will she stress that our beef is not with the people of Russia who share cultural links, but just with the leadership? And if we can persuade President Yeltsin to return to the rule of law, then we can rebuild those relations, Mr. Speaker.
I thank my honourable friend for his question. Indeed, as I've said before, our argument is not with the Russian people, and we continue to recognise that actually this is about the actions of the Russian state, it's about the actions of the Russian government. As I said earlier in my statement, many of us looked at a post-Soviet Russia with hope when that was first developed, but sadly what we've seen from the way in which President Putin has been dealing with these matters, it's a very different picture that we look at today.
Mr. Speaker, in welcoming the Prime Minister's actions in our statement today, can I point out that one notable ally who has not yet spoken out against Russia's actions in Salisbury is President Trump? Will she urge him to vociferously condemn Vladimir Putin and the Russian government's actions and to do so without delay?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that I spoke to President Trump yesterday. I'm sorry, I was looking to see if I had the comment that he had made, but he has spoken out against this particular incident that has taken place. But I will be continuing to speak. We will be continuing to speak with the American administration because they are one of the allies that we would encourage to work with us in a collective response on this issue.
Geoffrey Clifton-Brown.
I also commend my honourable friend for this, the package of measures she's taken today against this outrageous and illegal act on British soil. Can I ask her that all suspicious deaths should be thoroughly investigated by the police, and if the Russian government is implicated in any of those deaths, she stands by to take further tough measures against that state?
My honourable friend has raised an important issue because, of course, and this question has been raised before, of course, the reinvestigation of any deaths is a matter for the police, for them to consider whether what action they should be taking. At the moment, their focus is clearly on this particular investigation, but I'm sure they will look at that matter in due course.
Mary McCarthy.
Mr. Speaker, the Council of Europe has already been mentioned as one of the platforms with which we engage with Russia, although actually Russia has been withholding its payments for some time now. There's a motion on Magnitsky before the 46 other countries. There's also an inquiry into the death of Boris Nemtsov. Would it be helpful if the Minister for Europe came to Strasbourg to our next session to help spread the word that we need a Magnitsky law across Europe?
I'm certainly willing to look at the proposal that the honourable lady has made.
Hugo Swire.
We've seen a marked increase in the Balkans recently by Russia, very often using the Serbs as their proxy to try and dissuade some of the Western Balkan states from joining NATO. Will my right honourable friend urgently commit to discussing with NATO how to make sure those countries can accede now as quickly as possible.
Certainly, my honourable friend raises an important point. We are happy to look at the accession of certain of those countries to NATO, and I'm pleased that we will be hosting a Western Balkans summit here in the United Kingdom in July.
Toby Perkins.
Mr. Speaker, I endorse the actions the Prime Minister has taken and the unavoidable conclusion that she's come to. Was she as disappointed as I was that shortly after the powerful and excellent statement from Secretary of State Tillerson that he lost his job in the Trump administration, and will she pass on our message to President Trump how much we supported the words of Secretary of State Tillerson and encourage him to ensure that the person he appoints in his replacement is equally robust about the dangers from Russia?
Well, can I say to the honourable gentleman who forms part of the American administration is not a matter for me, but for the President. But we are leaving our American colleagues in no doubt about the seriousness of this issue. Mr. Tillerson did indeed give robust comments after this incident took place, and I'm sure we'll be working with his replacement to ensure that America is one of those allies who stand alongside us.
Paul Masterson.
Mr. Speaker, this attack on our soil is part of a long and aggressive strategy by Russia, not just to undermine the West, but to divide and rule. And so with that in mind, does the Prime Minister agree with me we need to do more to call the Putin regime out, including recognising their occupation, because that is what it is, an occupation of Georgia?
I say to my honourable friend that we will, of course, stand ready to call the Putin administration out, the Russian government out, and we do that across a number of fronts and will continue to do so.
Dr. Rupa Huq.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for her statement and the concern that she expressed to me yesterday regarding the surprise substances that some of us received in our parliamentary post this week? Not on a Salisbury scale, but frightening nonetheless. Can she then commit to the full force of the law being felt by those who operate within and outside it, and to go a bit faster on the long-promised public registers of property? Many of these are Russian-owned, because this has been government policy since David Cameron. And if they were in place by now, we'd know where the assets are to freeze.
First of all, reiterate the comments I made in Prime Minister's questions, that this was an appalling acts that were taken against Muslim members of this House, and of course a full investigation is taking place. In relation to the public register of ownership, this is a matter that I have discussed with the Business Secretary. It is the intention of the government to bring this forward so that we can ensure that we shine a light on this particular issue.
Alex Shelbrooke.
Speaker, whilst we've been sat here, the political journalist Tom Newton-Dunn has tweeted that the Leader of the Opposition spokesman has clarified that he does not believe there is proof yet that Russia was responsible for Salisbury, and MI5, MI6 may be wrong. There is a history between WMDs and intelligence, which is problematic, to put it mildly. Could I ask my right honourable friend to reiterate to the House the faith she has in the intelligence services to be absolutely certain the evidence she receives?
It's not so much about the views of a journalist, I say to the honourable gentleman. The honourable gentleman is in order to ask for the views of the Prime Minister on the intelligence services, and that he has done. That is perfectly orderly. The Prime Minister.
I am surprised and shocked at the statement that has been put out by the spokesman for the Leader of the Opposition. And as I was going to say, it is very clear, I think, from the remarks that have been made by backbenchers from the Labour Party that they will be equally concerned about that remark. They stand full square behind the government in the analysis that we have shown and the action that we've taken.
Chris Evans.
In 2010, Gareth Williams, a British security employee, was found in a padlocked hold-all, naked and decomposing. The coroner ruled it an unlawful killing. The contortionist, who is professionalist, couldn't get out the bag himself. Yeah. Will, in light of the events with Russia, will she now reopen that case and look to find out if Mr. Williams was indeed another victim of Vladimir Putin?
I recall the case that the honourable gentleman has raised. As I said in response to one of my honourable friends on this side of the House, actually matters of investigation into criminal activity that's taken place will be a matter for the police to determine whether or not they reopen that case.
Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the people of South Leicestershire, may I welcome the Prime Minister's robust but measured statement. Mr. Speaker, on Monday I met with BBC World's senior management at BBC Broadcasting House, and whilst the Prime Minister is correct to have said to the honourable member for Gedling that broadcasting is a matter for Ofcom. Funding isn't. I understand the BBC World Service are in communications with the Secretary of State and with the Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Will she assure this House today that if BBC World Service needs additional funding to combat Russia today, particularly in the Balkans and Baltic, will she undertake to speak to the Chief Secretary to the Treasury?
Well, my understanding is that discussions are indeed taking place around the funding of the World Service and that we expect a resolution in due course.
Stephen Kinnock. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to add my full support to the Prime Minister's robust response today. As Director of the British Council in St Petersburg from 2005 to 2008, I have first-hand experience of the utterly ruthless way in which the Russian state can operate. Does the Prime Minister share my concern, though, that holding the World Cup in Russia this summer could be perceived as a global vindication of Mr. Putin's regime? And if so, would she be making representations to FIFA to explore the possibility of postponing the World Cup until 2019 and holding it in a more appropriate host country or countries?
Thank the honourable gentleman for his support and also say that's particularly valuable given the experience that he has from his time with the British Council. Can I also say to him that the holding of sporting events and the choice of venues for those sporting events is a matter for the sporting authorities. As regards the sporting authorities here in the United Kingdom, they will have heard what I have said today about the actions of the Russian state.
Nigel Huddleston.
Mr. Speaker, this attack could have been so much worse. What if a group of schoolchildren playing in the park had been the first to have approached the victims when they were collapsed? Does the Prime Minister therefore share my disgust that the perpetrators of this crime must have known this?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, he is absolutely right. I think that, of course, we do have one other individual in Detective Sergeant Nick Bailey, who was affected as a first responder by this act that took place. But it could have been so different, as he says. And it is thanks to the prompt action of the emergency services in relation to this that the matter was has been contained in the way that it has. But those who undertook this brazen and despicable act must have known the potential implications.
Sir Malcolm MacDonald.
Facts are chills that one ding, Mr. Speaker, which is why there can be no feigning of impotence anywhere on these benches. Can I ask what her assessment is of the example advanced by my honourable friend from Western Berkshire on Monday in asking the Spanish government to halt the use of their ports for the refuelling by the Russian fleet?
That is indeed a matter. Of course, it is the case that others within the other member states of the European Union have indeed, at least one member state of the European Union, has indeed refused the Russian state the possibility of refuelling its ships at their place. This is a matter that is raised from time to time, and I recognise the significance and the passion with which the honourable gentleman and his colleague have raised it.
And Gareth Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, nobody should be surprised that Russia have denied any kind of responsibility of the attacks in Salisbury. This is a country that has denied taking part in the Olympics doping scandal. They've denied taking part in any kind of rigging of elections, and worst of all, they've denied any kind of involvement with the killing of Alexander Litvinenko. Given that, would the Prime Minister please assure the House that, as this matter goes forward, that Russia will be treated in accordance with its actions and not with its words?
My honourable friend makes a very important point. I think we should all be very clear that the attitude of the Russian state is shown by what it does, not by what it says.
Diana Johnson.
I welcome the statement of the Prime Minister and the actions that she's outlined. She particularly said that there was a need for a new targeted power to detain those suspected of hostile state action at the UK border. I think many of us will be surprised that we don't already have that power, and I wondered if she could say, is there a plan to bring forward emergency legislation so that power can be put in place very quickly?
The power currently exists for those who are suspected of involvement in terrorism, but not for hostile state activity. And my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, will be looking urgently at the most appropriate legislative vehicle to bring that power forward.
Chris Philp.
The Prime Minister was quite right to point out this is simply the latest act by a criminal rogue state. We can think about the Malaysian Airlines Jet 17 that was shot down, the invasion of Crimea, and the support for a murderous regime in Syria. I fully support the Prime Minister's position. I am horrified by the statement read out on behalf of the Leader of the Opposition's spokesman. But can I add my voice to those of other members today in asking the Prime Minister to look very quickly and seriously at financial sanctions on individuals closely associated with the Putin regime, as well as the wider Russian economy.
Can I simply make the point? We of course look across the board at all the tools that are available to us. Of course, but we do operate within the rule of law, and there are certain criteria which need to be met if sanctions are going to be applied.
Christian Matheson.
I welcome the Prime Minister's statement and look forward to aggressively chasing down that dirty Russian money. But there are now 15 suspicious deaths. And can I ask the Prime Minister about the prevalence of these deaths in the UK? Are there more in the UK than in other similar Western countries? And if so, why? Is it because we've got more Russians, or is it because Russia is deliberately targeting the United Kingdom?
Just caution to the honourable gentleman when he describes all of those deaths as suspicious. I believe that indeed one of the families involved has made very clear that they do not consider there was any suspicion around the death of their loved one. But this is a matter which, if the police feel it is right to reopen cases, then of course they will do so, and it is up to the police to make that operational decision.
Alex Chalk.
I thank the Prime Minister for her calibrated, proportionate and robust response. And will she join me in paying tribute to the brave British intelligence agents who serve our country? And in light of the increasingly violent and erratic approach of the Russian state, does she agree that if there needs to be a reassessment of their personal security here in the UK, that should take place without delay?
I'm very happy to join my honourable friend in welcoming, congratulating and thanking all those who work for our security and intelligence agencies for the absolutely valuable work that they do for us on a day-to-day basis. And can I say to him that it is each of those agencies will consistently be ensuring that they are considering the safety of their staff. They recognise the important work they do and how important it is to ensure that those staff are safe.
Clive Efford.
Russia has consistently behaved in this manner over a very, very long period of time, but that has not stopped the elite of our major sporting organisations, such as the OECD, and now the proven to be corrupt FIFA regime under Sepp Blatter, from allocating major sports tournaments to Russia. So does she agree with me that these elite in our sport now need to look to themselves and not isolate themselves from human rights issues and criminal law when it comes to allocating these major tournaments?
Well, I say to the honourable gentleman, as he will know, I think the elite in certain sporting organisations have found themselves under scrutiny in a variety of ways over recent years. But I think it is important that we all have a care to issues around human rights and other matters when these things are being considered.
Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I first begin by welcoming the Prime Minister's robust and proportionate statement. Further to the statement from my honourable friend, the member from Elmet and Rothwell, the Leader of the Opposition's spokesperson seems to have suggested that there is some parallel between Salisbury and Iraq. Could the Prime Minister confirm that in Iraq no weapons of mass destruction were ever found, yet in Salisbury 3 people are in hospital because chemical weapons were used? And could she give us an update, please, on their condition?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. What we are talking about here in the United Kingdom is the use of a chemical weapon, a nerve agent, a military-grade nerve agent, against people here in the United Kingdom. That is very clear, and I think it is quite wrong and outrageous that the Leader of the Opposition spokesman has made the comments in relation to this that he has.
Ms Williamson.
The horrendous incident in Salisbury has placed a huge and unforeseen burden on the local police, and we know that the police service has faced unprecedented cuts, and I wonder whether the Prime Minister can give an assurance
I wonder whether the Prime Minister can therefore give an assurance that this additional burden will be met from central resources and not fall upon the local police to pick up the bill.
What has happened in this case is, of course, the initial response to the incident was taken by Wiltshire Police. When it became clear the nature of this incident, actually they were able to draw not only on support from neighbouring forces, but crucially the counter-terrorism capability came into place, and it was counter-terrorism police that have taken on the investigation and are running that investigation. And they have, it's not just about resources, but it's about the capabilities that those police officers have and that the counter-terrorism force has that has been able to be brought to bear in this instance.
Courts. Speaker, is the Prime Minister able to give any update on the treatment and health of the brave policeman who was harmed going to help, and will she pay tribute to him?
I'm very happy to pay tribute to Detective Sergeant Nick Bailey, who, as I think I mentioned the other day, I believe said that he was merely doing his job. That is the attitude that is taken by all our police officers on a daily basis, no matter what danger they find themselves in. My understanding is that he remains seriously ill, but he has been engaging and has been conscious.
Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The response from the Prime Minister in reaction to this terrible incident in Salisbury is proportionate, appropriate and robust. But would the Prime Minister agree with me that we need to go further and set an example in this House that all honourable and right honourable members should immediately and permanently desist from appearing on any Russian propagandist channels, including Russia Today and Sputnik?
I think the honourable gentleman makes a very good point. I have spoken about the actions the government can take, but there are actions that individual members of this House can also take to send a clear message.
James Cartledge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I strongly welcome my right honourable friend's steadfastness and statesmanship in standing up to this Russian aggression. But does she agree with me this attempted murder on our soil by the Russian state will not enrich the lives of a single Russian citizen at home in Russia, and that this is the autocrat's classic contract down the years, externalising internal discontent with aggression abroad because the leader in question knows he cannot deliver and will never deliver the prosperity, freedom and democracy that the Russian people are so long overdue?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. There is not a single person living in Russia who is going to benefit, whose prosperity will be increased, whose life chances will be increased as a result of this action that has been taken. This is about the Russian state. It is not about their care for the Russian people.
Pollard.
Mr. Speaker, I condemn Russia for this attack. The Prime Minister will know a strong Royal Navy is a strong deterrent against Russian aggression. So will the Prime Minister now ensure there's sufficient new money provided to the Royal Navy so there's no cuts in the Royal Navy or the Royal Marines?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that, of course, we have been providing extra funding to the Royal Navy and have been enhancing the fleet of the Royal Navy. And I was very pleased last summer to be able to go on the new aircraft carrier Queen Elizabeth, which is a very fine example of not just of our Royal Navy, but of the commitment that this government makes to our defence.
Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the Prime Minister's statement and a robust defence of a rules-based international order, as too many people died in the 20th century to establish it, to just throw it away in the 21st century. Would she confirm what discussions we're having with the Republic of Ireland, as given she's rightly referred to the border and need for security there, we share a common travel area with them, what discussions she's planning to have with them about making sure that whole border area is secure?
The common travel area and the operation of the CTA is something that we discuss on a regular basis with the Irish government, as we have been looking in recent times to enhance the security arrangements that we have put in place, and we will continue to do so.
Order. I thank the Prime Minister and all colleagues who have questioned her this afternoon.